as you stepped in as the lead writer, you had a lot of freedom. I think, like I said, that was our intention to like tell whatever story you thought was good. Um, what story is that? What did you choose?
Sure. Yeah. And that was very fun. Oftentimes when you're working on a project for like another studio or someone else, like you feel very like constrained, like, oh, I have to make sure that this still feels like theirs. And there was none of that. Like I really felt like I got to like explore. And like some of our, I feel like the conversations we had about the story where we talked about plot points and where it could go and what would be next were like that was like a creative dream for me of things I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be part of a writer's room. I've always been jealous that TV writers get to like sit all together and like go through each other's scripts and punch it up and add jokes and like, what about this? And so that was really fun. I felt like those conversations were so life-giving to say, if this, then what about this? And what if the story goes here? And then it made it a breeze to write because we'd already like kind of plotted out all the plot points.
Right on.
But really, the story that really kind of fascinated me at the moment was, we have this will not spoil the game. You find out very, very quickly in the game that a very famous person has gone missing. And so, in the process as a player, trying to figure out, well, why? Where did they go? Why did they disappear? One of the things that had been fascinating me in pop culture at the time was there were all these documentaries about like con men, like people who conned a lot of people out of a lot of money by pretending to be something they weren't. And there were
Like inventing Anna. Is that what you're thinking
yes,
about?
inventing Anna, which she was on Dancing with the Stars, and I
Right.
was like glued to the television for all of that. And my kids were like, I don't get it. I don't
What's
get
the
it.
deal?
Right. And I was like, you're gonna have to watch. Like you don't understand. So anyway, we just kind of had this cultural moment of all together being very fascinated with these like very modern con men, like conning people in a very like unique to now sort of way, using social media, using kind of the tools at our disposal right now, like all the ways we intentionally like put ourselves out there for perception. And so what really fascinated me with this was just all of the conspiracy theories of like who could he be? Why might he have disappeared? Is he who he says he is? And then like exploring the idea that like someone like an Anna Delvey type was different people to different people, and
Yeah.
is this person that way? Certainly certain people have different stories about him that start to lead you in one direction, and then you go, well, actually, wait a second, I thought he was kind of like this, but according to this person, a very different type of person.
Right.
And so that just really opened us up to all kinds of exploration about like really just like the fun sort of conspiracy theories. And we kind of hit all the major ones that you would hit, like if a celebrity now disappeared, like you'd hit all the major
Right.
conspiracies, and we really did. Like there's a lot of really fun storylines that we got to explore, and that was kind of the fun part, is that episode by episode we could kind of focus on one particular angle. So yeah, that just was delightful for me because those were stories I'd been really engaged with, and it was fun to explore them in a sci-fi world, in a different kind of story, especially knowing where we were taking the story by the end of it.
Yeah. I'm curious now. Some of the major characters. Obviously, we've got the lead is Verity Lux, so she's the main character. What did you have in mind with her, and do you feel like you got what you were hoping for?
Sure. Verity is a lot of fun because she's super smart. She's a little sassy, but like good natured. And I'm sure that that's because I think of myself as sort of sassy, but good natured. Like deep down, I want to be good, but in any given conversation, I may be a little mouthy from time to time. And she's definitely that, which I think is a lot of fun. So, and but she's also like really passionate in a world where passions are often maybe dulled by like substances and
Right.
other pursuits. She's really passionate, maybe too passionate about the truth, like maybe too focused, like in a world where like all of us are maybe different things to different people. She like very intensely believes that there must be a single truth she can get at. And that may be one of her greatest flaws also, is that perhaps that idea of like a singular truth she can discover may sometimes lead her the wrong way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
She comes off as earnest in a world that's otherwise cynical.
sure.
Um, And I find that compelling because it's actually her earnestness that creates the, I think, friction sometimes with some of the other characters because they're like, why do you care? Right? And she's like, well, of course I care. So I think that's really interesting. Tell me about some of the other characters. Like, who else are we going to see in the story?
Abe was fun to write because Abe is like a horrible boss, right? A horrible boss, except he's like not so horrible that you would leave immediately. And sometimes I think these are the worst people in our lives, is someone who's like kind of horrible, but without super meaning to be, and like toxic,
Right.
but without being so toxic. Because if someone's just so toxic, then it's easy. We just go, oh, that's a garbage human. Peace out. I'm not going to stay here.
I'm done.
When you've got that mid-level toxicity, I think that's always way harder for all of us to like kind of figure out like, oh, am I being judgy? Like just all those
Yeah.
kinds of things we do with people where you go, am I not giving them the benefit of the doubt? Have I painted them wrong? And so he was really fun to write because he's a boss we would all hate, but maybe not hate enough to like move on from. And so
Right.
I think we can all relate to people like that, and to how sticky that gets compared to someone who's just absolutely bad news. So he was really fun to write, and of course, like, and he says wildly inappropriate things, and for me, those are always fun to write. I love writing wildly inappropriate things, and if we can label them as like not the best, then like even more great.
One of the other characters that you see pretty much right away in the first episode is Rafferty Eberhard. Tell me about Rafferty.
Rafferty's my very favorite. And he's probably like maybe one of the worst people in the whole game. I don't know. But he's definitely one of my favorite characters. And a little behind the scenes spoiler is that he was absolutely modeled after a character I loved on a TV show. And so I don't typically do that, but there was a character on a TV show that I just always found so engaging. And it was this character that, again, was like an awful person, but so charismatic. And so everything they did, you knew was wrong, but they were so charismatic that they just captivated your attention, and you always wanted them to be on these episodes, even though, I mean, it's the classic, like, you love to hate them. And so, kind of channeling that. And I, as an artist, have no fear of drawing inspiration, because I just go, oh, I couldn't write the same thing as that writer if I tried. Like, so if I pull a really unique, like, character and like give it my own spin, I'm never worried that like, oh no, this will be exactly that same character. But I think because of it being someone that I'd like spent some time thinking about and kind of like had some ideas about how they would engage with the world. Definitely, that's a character that I think a lot of the humor in the game kind of like circles around, which makes them
Agreed.
An interesting character for sure.
I think so. So you have like Rafferty here, like the absolute scamp, and then I think that when you have them, and then I think one of the other characters you run into really quick is Selma, the mother of the missing girl. So we meet her right away, and I think she winds up being like kind of like the good mom, right? And so she's one of the few really, I think, unsullied characters in the whole game. Like I don't think she ever has a bad moment, but it creates this interesting place where between these two characters, Verity's trying to find the truth. Like, and especially like we're trying to understand Walker. We're trying to understand the missing character. Like, is this a good person, bad person, somewhere in between? And that, I think that tension between like what counts as good in this world, what counts as wretched, what's acceptable. It added so much fun for the dialogue, and there was so much easy back and forth. So I think by the end we had quite a character list. I want to say that there's 15, 20 different people. Like some of them are obviously like more experienced than others. Some of them beg for spinoffs. So you're going to meet Officer Mercer, who, you know, you had this hint about like, what's the story with his daughter? And like, we haven't written this story, but the idea like she may be possessed in some wild way. Like there's this thing here. We've got the love interests. So this idea like you can't have interfiction without shipping. Like that's just not a thing. So I'm actually curious. I'd like to ask about that piece too. Have you had a chance to do, and this isn't like a romance book, but it certainly has an element of that. Have you done that before? Because I'm unaware of it actually.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was a fascinating thing to explore because typically interactive fiction, like these video games that are mostly story and making narrative choices, have done so well in the romance genre.
Yeah.
But that's always something that has left me as a player a little bit isolated, as someone who is like, oh, I love to read. I love a good story. I would love to play through a story in a game. But then all of the top interactive fictions are these like just full-fledged
Right.
romance, like, and not just like romance, like, oh, a lovely story, but like romance.
Romance.
Oh no, I'm scandalized. Um, and so I knew that like if we wanted to like really engage people that already love this genre, we need some of those romance elements in there. So those are in there for sure. And it's what makes a story wonderful. Like, I don't know. I love science fiction. I recently learned that there's like a difference between like hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi. And I didn't really know this. And I got conned into reading a hard sci-fi book. And I was like, they're just describing technology. Like when is the character, like when is the plot, and when will they fall in love, and where will the relationships happen? And it was, I mean, that was sprinkled in there, but only like as a means to get you to read about how their spaceship worked in their own brain. And I was just like, oh no, what is happening? So I'm a person who feels like a story without like some element of how these characters feel about each other and like some kind of love interest is a little missing for me. So that's totally in there. But my hope is that this will be a game for people who love to read, like just for readers.
Yes.
And I haven't always encountered that sometimes even in, well, maybe even especially in interactive fiction, that it's maybe these are the games like for people who don't love to read, like, oh, a story for people who hate reading. And I think this is like a game for people who love reading. And like, it's not straight interactive fiction. Like there's gameplay, there's things you find and discover and do. But yeah, so the question of if it was a stretch for me, I have in some novels that I have not published, like explored relationship dynamics before, but probably not like, so like a love story, but not like a romance novel, as that's just kind of not my genre. So this definitely took some of those things a little further than I have before. And it was like really fun to get to explore that space.
You mentioned how like interactive fiction has such a good and frankly strong market for romance stories. But I think we started this game with the notion that mystery is an equally powerful, like that's the right genre for this story. And yet that genre also has stories like Bones or Silk Stockings or whatever. Like this idea like this is a mystery, but there's this kind of like flirtatious thing to it. It feels like it's actually a really well established, trope is too wrong. Like it's a formula that works. So I like the idea of like we've set Verity up to be, like you said, she's smart, she's sassy, she's got all this like potential, and she's gonna change the world. But also like she's got a life and story, and she, you know, and wants to. She's human, and I think that vulnerability is actually really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, this was something you touched on earlier, but like this idea that we're trying to figure out, like, is Walker a good guy or a terrible guy? Kind of like throughout the whole story. But I love that we're kind of doing the same. Well, maybe not. I mean, we play as Verity. So as Verity, we're kind of asking the same question of ourselves. Like, wait, I thought I was a good person, but maybe I'm actually not. And so I like that sort of trying to examine that about someone else's life makes her reflect a little bit more on her own life. And even in the characters you pointed out, like it's so easy when you compare yourself to someone like Rafferty to be like, oh yeah, like I'm pretty great. I don't know that I have much to work on. And then like you described Selma as being someone who like, I don't think she has a bad moment, but like there's a ton of tension between her and Verity. And I think a lot of that is because she asserts a certain like value and virtue that Verity is like, it's foreign to her. And she's like, why do you value that? And why are you looking down on me for not valuing that? That doesn't seem okay. And so I think that's very human to like, when confronted with maybe our own flaws, to initially be very frustrated and to be a little dismissive and judgmental and
or defensive.
We get that way. And then to like eventually maybe, if we're lucky, have a moment of going, okay, well, even though that person's a jerk and no one should listen to them, I might have a little work to do here. Yeah.